So, ever since I was a little girl, I always dreamed of meeting the man of my dreams and we'd live happily ever after. And when I met Toby, I thought that would be the case. We were only teenagers when we met, and it didn't take long before we fell pregnant with Hayley, and I thought this might be the start of my dreams coming true. The only problem was that when Toby fell in love with me, he also fell in love with drugs. And it didn't take long before getting his next hit was more important than me or the kids, and he'd fly into fits of rage, and it just became a really scary time for all of us. I then started gambling, and I did that because to me it was the only way that we were going to get out of that situation. It's the only way we could get money to leave. The only problem was that I lost more. And one night I got home and Toby, he was really bad. He started hurting me and he threw the baby out of my arms, and we were terrified. So the second he left, we just grabbed our stuff and we ran. And we stayed in a shelter, stayed there for a while, and they were amazing. They helped us get back on our feet. They helped me find a home. They helped me get a job. They helped me with my gambling. And Marlene, the kids' grandma, she was there to help support us as well. And then I met Jason. I met him because we worked part-time together. And he really liked me and he loved the kids. And I actually thought maybe my happily ever after is going to come true again. But after a while, he became really strict. He organised for all of my pay to go into his account, and anything I wanted to buy or didn't want to buy, it was all controlled by him. He was the man of the house, so he told everyone what to do, which included disciplining the children. But he really scared me with the way he disciplined Jackson, really terrified me, and he wouldn't listen to me at all. He would stop me from visiting my friends. I wasn't allowed to see them anymore because they weren't mums, they didn't know what it was like to be a mum, they didn't have any responsibility, and they were just bad influences. He also installed a tracking app on my phone so I couldn't see anyone. Any part of my movements were all tracked, my kids as well. He'd let Marlene come over to help though, but then when she pulled him up on how he interacted with Jackson, he just decided that we weren't going to see her anymore, and that's been really hard. So since we're split, I don't know. I have no energy. I don't know what to do. I just miss Cruz. I just want him back. And Jason says that he's going to convince the courts that I'm a bad mum and that I'll never see him again. And I worry that it's true. I just don't know what to do anymore. I just feel really helpless. I don't think I'm going to see my boy ever again.
Torna has worked in social work academia and as a trauma-informed practitioner since graduating from social work in 2004. She's currently the Senior Practitioner and Educator for Gender Equality, a Tasmanian family violence service which provides medium to long-term counselling, group work and workshops statewide. More recently, she has created a video series on coercive control and developed a toolkit for practitioners that operationalises coercive control and shows ways to apply coercive control theory in their work with clients.
Wow, Carla, I do have a bit to say. I also have a rising level of concern that we take for granted that Cruz is not living with her anymore and that she may find it difficult to get him back. My understanding from all the case studies so far is that Jason just took him. So my question is, one of those wondering questions is how's that okay? How is that okay? And if we look at the relationship between Carla and Toby and Jason, we can see a clear pattern of coercive control. Obviously, working for a family violence agency, my lens is going to be family violence and trauma and grief and loss. But my lens is also coercive control, which is slightly different again to family violence in that it's about the control. And it's about the system and the pattern of control and how that's played out. The way I describe coercive control is a good start. It's a system of strategies and tactics to gain and maintain control over the target and the children. Jason fits into this pattern very well. He's admitted it himself, and Carla has spoken about it without actually quite realising what she's speaking about. If we are to think about coercive control as somebody who does no longer have freedom of choice, freedom of movement, or freedom of communication, we start to understand the level and depth and breadth of how coercive control affects a family, whether it's executed by a male, a female, or any gender. We have to really consider the gender inequality here in Carla's situation. The gender inequality stems from women having to ask men for the right to vote, for the right to have a life where they didn't have to ask permission from their husband for anything to happen at all. We are still doing that in this society. The dynamics of coercive control are similar to any type of oppression that we perpetrate upon one another. They're not that unusual, they're not hard to understand, and if we don't have that lens to at least look through and have a little look at what's happening in a family, we will miss the point. And we'll start to go for perhaps this incident, or he said that, or she said that, or this child is behaving like that. And we miss the pattern that they're living within. We miss the control. We miss the actual oppression. And we go for incidents and episodes, and we go for little things. And therefore, we are not doing we're not really executing our duty of care to this family. And gender equality works with any gender. Our main clients are women, though, but increasingly any gender. And they come to us mostly in a stage of utter confusion and trauma and loss because of Jason types in the world. There are many styles of Jasons, many styles. I'm going to just briefly touch on 10 today, 10 styles. Jason is one of those styles. If we don't have some idea of how that style works, then we miss the point of what's going on in this family. So let me just start off by describing to you what the main drivers are of coercive control. And we might be able to work out something that's happened within the family between Carla and Jason. The three drivers are a superior, an entitled, and an adversarial attitude. That was evident in Jason's posture, the way he spoke, the way he made unilateral decisions about what went on in that family and what's going to go on in that family. That is coercive control. Someone with those attitudes, that combination of attitudes, is not somebody that you can negotiate with. So let me get clear, we aren't talking about conflict. This is no normal conflict. This is not Carla having an argumentative style and so is Jason, so therefore. This is not conflict that's created by two conflictual people. This is coercive control, which means that one person has that attitudinal stance that infects the entire relationship. We're not saying that the person who has the attitudinal stance is a bad person. What we're saying is they have the dynamics of coercive control, which means that in an intimate relationship, they will not allow you freedom of choice, freedom of movement, or freedom of communication, and they'll have their own style of doing that. And until we are all across those styles, we don't do our duty of care in post-separation issues. If we have three drivers, a superior, entitled, and adversarial attitudinal style, we've also got 8 main strategies that would have been used upon Carla, and I can detect them in what she said already, which meant that she could not raise anything, address anything, or solve anything. Even if she's not that skillful with her interpersonal style, she wouldn't have a hope with somebody who had those drivers and Jason's superior, entitled and adversarial attitudinal style. She wouldn't have a hope. So one of the strategies that I'll start with is conversational control. Jason is most likely to have refused, blocked, or forced conversation. Conversation is the mainstay of any relationship. If you can't have a conversation where anything can be resolved, it will tip from possibly a relationship that had the possibility of being equal to unfair to abusive. This relationship was abusive. That was just one strategy. A second strategy is keeping her in confusion, fear, obligation, guilt or shame to get his own way. She's been constantly feeling those emotions since the gloss has worn off the relationship with Jason. Number 3, using a victim stance and or retaliation and backlash. That's a very common strategy. It's really clear that when Jason wants to, he will go into a victim stance. He and Cruz are buddies, or he just wants to do the right thing by Cruz, which is a good way to get everybody into, I'm a good boy, I'm a good person, I've just got this really radically awful mother to deal with. Strategic use of intermittent kindness and withholding of reassurance, information and empathy. Carla would never know what was going on. There would be no predictability, there'd be no emotional intimacy, there would be an incredibly strong pattern of emotional abuse. She would have been held to different and higher standards than Jason held himself to. Double standards right through the entire relationship. She would have experienced contradictory expectations of her, which places her in no-win, double binds, where didn't matter what she did, she couldn't win, she couldn't get anywhere, she couldn't get any resolution or get her voice heard or get any equality, get any autonomy or get any agency. She would have had her boundaries disrespected. Now, she's alluded to sexual coercion. Most women don't like to talk about that. But whenever we have women coming to engender equality, usually after a while they tell us all about the sexual coercion. And we have women who have to send their children to their coercive controller post-separation, who've been held up against walls by their neck, who have been raped, and there's different forms of rape, there's different kinds. Some types of rape are very hard to describe and they're not going to get anywhere in the court. And this is just one part of the relationship. So disrespecting your boundaries, likes and choices, that will go across the board, and disrespecting your rights or her rights. So there's 8 main strategies. Now, out of those drivers and those strategies comes an infinite array of tactics that will keep and maintain control. Now, not all coercive controllers actually understand that they're doing this, but when you map out the relationship, it's very easy to see it, trace it, and to predict what's going to happen post-separation. It's not hard. So if we talk about the infinite array of tactics, we're talking about all the things that happen within physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, social abuse, the technology abuse, cultural abuse, spiritual abuse, all the different types of behaviours and communication possibilities within those areas. Some of these tactics are not covered by our Family Violence Act. They are subtle and they are clever. And they're also, some of them are very depraved. So it's really, I struggle a little bit with remaining neutral until you've actually applied a coercive control lens to check out whether the relationship was actually equal or not. And if not equal, what was it like? Who had control? Who made the decisions about who made the decisions? It wasn't Carla. She wasn't making the decisions about who made the decisions. She had those decisions made for her at every level. There are multi-layered effects on a target of coercive control, and Carla is showing signs of absolute trauma. She's also got the effects on her children, and the effects of their trauma, it impacts on her, and the trauma on her impacts on the children. So you have a two-way thing there. That means someone like Jason can easily get in and literally keep control. He can divide and conquer. He can have different relationships with each of the children. Now, all of this is well researched. All of this is easy for you to find on the internet in peer-reviewed journals. It's all there. So if we look at the different tactics that can be used, we can also look at the different styles. So coercive controllers all tend to have the superior, adversarial and entitled attitudinal style. They all use that similar set of strategies. And they will use a different array of tactics depending upon their agenda and their what they're interested in controlling. There are some coercive controllers who are very keen to control the sexual relationship and the finances and maybe the social life of a target, but they're not so worried about other things. And there are some types of coercive controllers, some styles that are complete and utter drill sergeants. They will control every movement of every child and every person in that household at every time of the day. And or else. And it's the or else, it's the fear. And it's the trauma that keeps everyone obeying. And also the fear, not being understood by someone outside, of people not knowing, and also the confusion of not knowing quite what's going on yourself. So we have a hugely complex system, coercive control. It's a system of strategies and tactics. It goes through stages. It has different styles. It has major effects on the mothers and the children. It comes out post-separation. It's played out for us all post-separation. And if we don't get that, then we all pick at parts of the post-separation relationship and try and make sense of it without understanding the actual disease, which is coercive control. So it's very likely that when someone suggested that, and it was just a suggestion, that Jason may have felt that he had to control the money because Kayla had been a gambler in her previous relationship and had recovered. We don't know the full story about that now, but it seems like she's not doing that anymore. But actually, you know, if we just settle on that, then we miss the entirety of the relationship and the control that all those children and that mother are currently under. A coercive controller divides and conquers. It's inevitable that the relationship between the siblings and between the children and the mother and any other member of family is going to go awry. That's just a normal part of being affected by coercive control. There would have been many, many reasons and years of influence by Jason behind that. And remember, I'm not trying to make this all about Jason, but once you've got a coercive controller, you have to know the pattern. And you've got to be able to identify it and then help the Jasons of the world sort out that behaviour and acknowledge that if you do that post-separation, you are not going to be parenting your children well, and your post-separation behaviour towards someone like Carla will continue to be superior, entitled and adversarial. And unless we help with that, we are not helping. I do not see many of the Jasons of the world being held accountable. They might be held accountable for the odd thing, incident. Maybe they got a PFVO for an incident, but not for the entirety of the relationship. and the pattern of control and the way that people's, in that family, their life chances were reduced. Their freedom was taken away. Their freedom of choice was taken away. Their freedom of movement and communication taken away. And that is the problem, is that we as an agency, we teach women this. They know this, they map out the relationship themselves. Sometimes it's between two women, sometimes it's between two men. This is not a man-hating exercise. It's a dynamic disliking exercise though. These dynamics take away people's lives. They reduce their lives. I don't like using the word victim survivor because plenty of women say, I don't think I'm surviving even. I don't actually survive. Kayla's in that state now. She's not sure what's hit her. She doesn't know what to do. She doesn't know who's going to really believe her. So if you ask a woman, how were you treated physically in your relationship, including all your physical needs, you'll get a good picture of the physical abuse, and you'll start to see how the drivers, the strategies, the tactics all played out in the physical relationship, how they all played out in the communication patterns, how it all played out in the social arrangements, how it all played out in the financial arrangements, how it all played out in the sexual relationship, and in the way that the woman would be publicly portrayed. She has a messy house. I can't tell you, when I've done couples counselling, how many men brought in photos of the mess that she has in the kitchen. Can you see what I mean? She's really bad. And then when I actually, talk to the man about his own behaviour and so on and so forth, which, as you can imagine, I don't do, I don't hold back from, absolutely incensed. Well, it's not me. Look at her, look at the photos of the mess in the house, that's what I've got to put up with. And how do you treat her physically? And how do you treat her sexually? What are your conversations like? Let's map out your conversations. What can you talk about and what can't you talk about? Why not? What happens when you don't want to talk about something? How do you go? What do you say? What do you do? And how do you think that would be for your partner? And so on and so forth. And that's when you start to see the actual superior, entitled and adversarial attitude playing out, is that they have no idea how they impact on the women and the children. They don't know. They don't necessarily, they don't consider that. They just see the women and children as either meeting their needs or not, doing the right thing by them or not. And they may want to be good parents, but coercive controllers, and the research again internationally and nationally is in agreement on this, they do not make the best parents. So, and women will often say, I don't make the best parent either, and that's true, they often don't. And they have comorbidities and they have all kinds of issues. They don't have the kind of issues that a coercive controller has though with their parenting, which is power parenting. Whilst a child's young, all might be well with Jason and Cruz, but not when Cruz starts to get a voice. Then all will not be so good necessarily at all. Coercive controllers are well known for their ability to scapegoat, have favourites, groom, and to ignore. So the siblings have all got different relationships with the coercive controller, and that will depend upon the age of the child and just how the coercive controller decides to operate, and also what style they are. And their parenting is likely to be more volatile, more unproductive, more unreliable, more self-centred, with very poor boundaries. And that's not to mention all the other possible comorbidities of drugs and alcohol, and so on and so forth. They use a very shaming, blaming and defaming communication style. They can put on a very good public face. Privately, not so good. And one day there's going to be, and there's already started to be, class actions about from children who are now over the age of 18 who are going to actually sue for the situations that they've been put in, against their will and against what was sound and solid for them as children growing up, because they were not protected, their voice didn't feel heard, and they watched their mothers being persecuted by post-separation system one way or the other. So I would be seeing Carla as the victim or a target of Toby first and then Jason. I'd be looking through the lens of coercive control. I'd be describing to her and talking with her about the drivers of that, the personal drivers, but also let's put it into a broader context. The personal drivers are attitudinal, a superior, entitled and adversarial attitudinal style. Where did that style come from? We have cultural and social and other drivers and political and legal drivers that influence our behaviour as well, that lend their hand historically and otherwise to having a superior, entitled and adversarial attitudinal style. That style is not prone to understanding its impact, doesn't self-reflect, has a win-lose mindset, doesn't believe in collaboration or negotiation, doesn't understand how to necessarily do that, doesn't necessarily want that, isn't interested in owning own behaviour. There are some styles who you might be able to get more of that, and there are some styles you will never get it. You will never get it. All the research will say some styles of coercive control is not going to happen. The variety of styles, we have several styles that are not so prone to physical violence, but they may use physical violence. In other words, in coercive control, physical violence is but one of the tools, just one of the tools, of the tactics, just one of the tactics. And there are too many people, women and children, in post-separation relationships where there may not have been physical violence, but they are terrorised by the control and the or else. So let's talk about some of these not-so-physical styles. There's the water torturer, according to Lundy Bancroft. Lundy Bancroft is just one person who's put a name around these different styles. The water torturer is somebody who actually uses low-level emotional abuse, relentless to the target, constant. I'd say Carla has copped that. In other words, everything is kind of micromanaged and criticised and critiqued and amended and corrected, but you can't, the double standards means, the strategies are, can't do it back. You can't say, hang on a minute, that's not what's going on here, because that's not how a coercive controller works. There may never be a raised voice. There may never be name-calling or a whole lot of swearing or any incident that you could possibly call the police for, but you will lose your psychological and emotional health, and the children are not safe because they cop the same thing. Whatever the mother cops, the children cop. Whatever isolation the mother is in, so are the children. Whatever financial deprivation, so are the children. Whatever social defamation is going on, the children wear that as well. So we can't separate a coercive controller's relationship with the mother from the children. There's just no separation there. They are one and the same. Another form is the victim. The victim is just that. Everyone's done me wrong song. And if you stand up to me or counter me, then you have too. And everything's turned back on how hard it is for them and how awful it was for them. And they just play the victim game a lot of the time. There's also another style called Mr. Sensitive, who is the psychobabbler. And the psychobabbler uses all the latest jargon to prove that he's a damn good man, possibly even a feminist, actually, maybe not, but he can psychobabble you into literally Ward 1E. You can't get anywhere with them. And they don't offer anything in terms of collaborating, negotiating. It's not conflict. This is low-level, constant emotional abuse, constant. and it infects every part of the relationship. Contrary to those three styles, we have the terrorist, definitely uses physical violence, scary. The terrorist is just that, a terrorist. He will terrify women and children. He will end up probably, it's a bit like the man who ends up murdering his children, maybe her and maybe himself and maybe not. But the terrorist works on terror, and then there is the drill sergeant who's controlling the whole day and every activity within it. And then there's also the counterbalance to that is Mr. Right, or demand man. And they are, as they say, Mr. Right is right about everything. A bit like Jason is pretty much right about everything. He's not even willing to consider that there might be other ways. Now, he may respond, but only if he gets appropriately held accountable for how he's kept the family in sway. And if it can be done well, it can be done carefully, it's not abusive to do that. It's actually really helpful for Jason, because if you want to have a relationship with your children, you might need to learn a few more interpersonal skills. And we also have the player, and the player is someone who will play everyone else off, and the woman is completely unable to tell you what's going on. And that's just a little tiny snapshot. If you want to, you can read the Lundy Bancroft book, which is called The Angry and Controlling Man. There's a preface before that, but like Lundy Bancroft and other experts in this field, he says the anger of a coercive controller is not the anger from violation of boundaries. Like the anger of Carla is the anger of someone has violated my boundaries. Someone's taken my child without asking, without discussing, just made a unilateral decision. The anger of a coercive controller is because they're entitled and you didn't do what you were supposed to do, and it's an unfair expectation anyway, but I'm really angry about it. And the conflict is not the usual conflict of a relationship that simply isn't working anymore. It's not conflict, it's abuse. And you've got one person like Kayla who is truly struggling to understand how to get anywhere in this relationship, and everything she tries, she's made to look bad and to feel bad and loses hope. We get a lot of women coming to see us who are on the edge of suicide, and the only reason that they don't take their lives is because they don't want to leave the children. And you could say, I just see all the bad end all the time, but I read all the world research. And I know that there's other perspectives, but I do believe there's a whole argument in Australia now about criminalising coercive control. It's already been criminalised in the UK. Until we actually look through that lens, and the lens that Catherine very clearly put out there, which was the trauma that children go through when they are in a relationship like this, until we do that, we often can unwittingly, despite our best intentions, miss the point. Now, verbal, emotional and psychological abuse is something that most people don't have a really good handle on, and it is core to coercive control. Within the communication patterns of a coercive controller, there is a distinct pattern of conversational control, where the conversations can only go dependent upon what the coercive controller says. If you can have the conversation, when, for how long, in what tone, and what about. What topic can it be about, and who has the last say, because it's a last say thing. So that is the conversational style of a coercive controller. And maybe not every conversation. I'm pretty sure he can just, have the odd conversation, but when it comes to anything that requires navigating, you're going to get conversational control. Which means that he may not have the conversation, he may walk out on it, he will override it. He may well include emotional abuse, verbal abuse, And the psychological abuse is evident within the superior, entitled and adversarial attitude, because that is psychologically dominating. I am worth more than you. My reality is much more important. I make the decisions about whether your memory is accurate or not. And I also make the decisions about whether your memory is valid, and I say what's real. I say what's real, and that is psychological abuse. So the three drivers, superior, entitled and adversarial attitudinal style, will predispose a coercive controller to be psychologically abusive, verbally and emotionally abusive in the communication, conversationally controlling. Now, just with that, forget about physical violence, and you are not going to get anywhere. You will not be able to have any equality or any discussion that allows anything to be solved. And the trouble with that is that we don't unpack it, and we don't necessarily hold a man who does it, or hold any gender who does it, actually accountable for that. And then we can go into what strategies they've used, what tactics they've used, and how that's created change in every part of the target's life. The life they had before, the life they had after. They're usually trying to deal with post-separation financial exploitation, sexual subjugation, the defamation of their character. They're trying to deal with losing their voice, losing their autonomy, losing their integrity, losing family members, losing friends. And that is just the sort of the high end. We're not talking even about the very depraved relationships. There's drill sergeants and terrorists out there who have women in the most depraved situations, where the control extends all the way to how much toilet paper she can use every day, and in fact how often she can go, and which toilet in the house she's allowed to use. You know, like, honestly, more and more depraved than what any of you or I are used to hearing about. And so coercive control can be all these different styles, and we need to know them. We need to know the range. And therefore, when we have a couple coming to us, we can at least look through that lens and check it out. I'm not saying every couple's going through this. We can check it out. And only then are we doing our duty of care properly, because we are checking it out and we know about coercive control. We in Gender Equality are putting out a toolkit which can help a practitioner, because this is complicated stuff. It's not something we're all born knowing. It's complicated stuff, and given all the information around the world on this, we've created a toolkit, which is about 150 pages long, to actually help practitioners, help clients identify the drivers, strategies, tactics and impact of coercive control on the family. And it could be a great deal of use. I'm also going to be running workshops on it down the track for practitioners who are interested. So that's one of the services we're providing. Thanks very much, everybody.